Welcome back to a new episode of Mushroom Adventures. This is going to be an episode where I show you some improvements that I've done with grain spawn. Now in the past I've used mainly rye or wheat grain, and today I'm going to be using wheat grain. Now, I have tried this with milo, which is a small kind of round grain, and grains like that have a bit of a harder seed coat. This method still works for them, but it'll end up creating more burst kernels, a little bit more mushiness in the end, just because it's hard to get it higher enough that it doesn't crack the outside. But I've done it even with the mushy stuff in the bags, and it still turned out fine, so it wasn't gummy with starch bad enough. So if you have something like wild birdseed mix or something besides wheat or rye grain, go ahead and give it a try. So I'm going to first start by filling up these buckets. Now I'm making a batch of 12 bags of wheat grain spawn. So I'm going to fill 2 of these 5-gallon buckets all the way to the top. Actually, mounding on the top. This method will actually use more grain than you would if you were to boil the wheat before you bagged it. I might have to get another bag. A little shot. And then, well, I'll put that one up later, but go ahead and carefully divide this out into another 5-gallon bucket. Each one has half and half. You can see it pretty well. So I'm going to fill that up and divide it out, and we'll go to the next step. Now that I have the grain equally divided, I'm going to go ahead and to each 5-gallon bucket of grain, I'm going to add 3 gallons of lukewarm water. A little bit warmer than room temperature. Now you don't want to use cold water because in the 24 hours that you're going to soak this, or even a little bit longer, so 24 hours is what I'm doing, you want the water a little bit warm so it soaks into the grain a little bit more efficiently. And don't use hot water because you might end up spawning a lot of yeast, which won't hurt you in the end, but might make it a little funky smelling when you cook it up. I think the longest I've ever soaked the grain for was 2 days straight and still used it, but it definitely had more of a fermented smell to it. Now, like before, I'm going to add instant coffee. You see here I have pretty much the absolute cheapest brand I could find at the store, like beyond generic. And for every 5-gallon bucket, I'm going to add the same 10 teaspoons, mounting heaping teaspoons of the instant coffee. I can go ahead and do that while I'm filling up. You don't have to be exact. You can see 3 gallons of water fills it almost to the rim, about a couple inches from the top. Now, like before too, take your hand in there and carefully scoop off the bottom and mix all the coffee and water up so all the grain has water going to the bottom and evenly so. Alright, so I'm going to do the same for all 4 buckets, and I'll get back to the next step. It's the next day, been 24 hours since I've soaked this grain. Now the first thing I'm going to do is get some of the coffee in reserve. Now you might want to scoop it out with a pot or something and not just pour it because it might make a mess. See, I'm just gonna pour off one of the buckets, top of the coffee liquid in there, and have that into reserve. You'll see why we're using that here in a bit. Now for the rest, we're going to go ahead and drain all the coffee out of it. And this way, I'm going to know exactly how much water we're going to end up in the bags, because we're going to use some of this coffee liquid to add back into each bag, and that's what's going to rehydrate the grain, because otherwise we would have had to boil it for a while. Like we were doing before, where if I remember right, it was 15 to 20 minutes worth of boiling. But now, we're going to skip that entire part and save us some time and energy. So drain everything in this bucket. And I'm just using one of my quart pots, actually one of them that I would use to boil it, to hold all this strained grain. Try not to let a lot of it go down your drain. It'll clog it up. You don't have to drain it really good, because when I get down towards the bottom of the pot, I'm just going to dump the remainder out and re-strain it again. We'll also save a couple of these 5-gallon buckets to pour into as well. Or you can just keep on going using the same pot, but I like to strain it all at the start just so I get it over with. So I'm going to go ahead and strain all that grain out, and we'll get to the next step. Alright, you can see I have something new here. I built this to make loading up bags easier. It's just some 3/4 inch PVC with 8 corners. You can buy these at the big box stores like Lowe's and whatnot too. And then I took a road cone, brand new road cone, and cut the end off to make a funnel so it sits right down in there. And that way, I can take a bag and just put it up there. And I'm not splashing grain around, because one of the things I really hate is grain getting on the floor and you step on it and feel it underneath your feet. So the first thing I'm going to do, so I don't forget, is to take 1 cup of the reserve coffee liquid and put it in the bag. And then I'm going to use a scooper. You can see here I got a nice bin scooper, just aluminum. And put one hand on the side, and now I can just load it up really fast. Square it up. You can see there it sits inside nicely. And also too, I've made 2 markings on the edge that are 6 inches tall, and that's where I want to get the bags, so I can always kind of look down and see if I'm there a little bit more. Now, I always add more grain to bags than I would sawdust spawn, so they sit taller. And they'll take up a lot more room in the cooker. If you remember, for the sawdust, I'll have some jars at the bottom for space. And then I'm going to fold it. I have a new technique of folding these, where I don't use any tape, don't use any Tyvek filter sleeve. Really, it's unnecessary now. And just fold the top of it about halfway, leave the patch on the bottom. You just fold it downward and tuck it in like so. And then you can sit those next to other bags and they'll stay, closed and flopped over like that. Or just immediately put them in the cooker that's ready to go. Now, you can see in the bottom of this, there is liquid coffee standing there. And what you may find when you pressure cook this, when you take it out of the cooker when it's done, and you're getting ready to inoculate it, that the bottom is a bit mushy, a bit waterlogged. But as you'll see, we'll break that apart, and most of the grains will still be intact. You still won't have hardly any burst grains, just because they're still very intact. I have good grains to start out with too. Not a lot of chips and pieces out of it. So as it cooks, it's not going to split apart. So I'm going to get these all made, put them in the cooker, and I'll show you how they're arranged. I'm still using pieces of foil in between these bags. Get a section cut about 6 inches wide. And make sure you put them on the sides of the bags, and then a layer of pieces of foil in between the bags. And that way, as they cook, the plastic won't tend to stick to itself. I have had some times where you pull one bag away and it tore a hole in the other one where the plastic kind of melded together. But just a sheet of foil in between each bag, and then one on top. You don't need to put any on top of the second layer. That's what the pan is for. And the pan, you remember, that'll keep the flaps from flipping up and getting caught into the safety valves.